Hello friends, this is me host. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you all are doing well, and today I'm back with another video to give a review on our book, which is The House of Lost Whispers. This one is by Jenni Keer. It is all about that there is a whole other world just beyond the walls. Sunday, 14 April 1912. The unprecedented sales of his last book, The Mystery of the Broken Violin, had afforded Mr. Jasper Davenport and his wife the finances to sail across the Atlantic Ocean on the largest, most luxurious steamer in the world. It was to be truly the trip of a lifetime, and with public readings at various literary societies lined up in several large American cities. A potentially profitable one to boot. The Davenports, however, were devastated when their only daughter presented with a blotchy rash the week before their departure. The doctor confirmed what they all suspected. 13-year-old Olivia had contracted measles. Selina Davenport was all for cancelling, but was eventually persuaded by her husband that they should go ahead because the child had battled the worst of the illness before they were due to sail. Besides, he pointed out, by being on the maiden voyage of the RMS Titanic, they were certain to go down in history, and as an author of adventure novels. It was an experience he couldn't afford to miss. He already had in his mind an idea for a story set aboard a great ocean liner, so he planned to treat the trip as research. From the moment they stepped foot on the ship, they were in awe of both the size and magnificence of this engineering marvel, and as first-class passengers, they were treated like royalty by the crew, Their lowest 16 triple berth stateroom was the height of luxury, with electric heaters, horsehair stuffed sofas, and marble washstands. Rich expenditure carpeting had been laid in the first class reception area. The Georgian smoking room boasted a carved Italian marble fireplace, and the grandeur of the main staircase was unparalleled. Eager to remember every detail, both for the novel he was planning and to share with his daughter upon their return, Jasper made extensive notes on everything, from the bewelled mirrors and fine Irish white, rich Axminster carpeting, from the bewelled mirrors and fine Irish white linen to the quirky characteristics of his fellow passengers. Thomas Andrews, the exceedingly amenable Harland and Wolf naval architect who had designed the ship, was on board and was happy to talk about the construction and outfitting of the vessel. Captain Edward J. Smith proved incredibly helpful with his polite inquiries as to the procedures followed should someone pass away whilst they were at sea. Jasper even chatted to some of the children playing shuffleboard and quoits on deck, wondering who his daughter might have befriended had she been present. The following week, Olivia was mortified to be caught trying on one of her ladyship's silk evening dresses the afternoon before a large dinner party. It had been an impulsive act. The young girl, imagining what it might be like to be the lady of the manor, as she had walked past the open bedroom door and seen the gown lying across the bed. Eyes closed, and waltzing around the room in the arms of an imaginary Persian prince. She had been jolted from her daydream by the older woman's voice. "Olivia, what on earth are you doing?" I was attending a masked ball in the hope of stealing a priceless jewel. How ridiculous it sounded spoken aloud. Play acting? I don't understand. You have loads of pretty dresses of your own. You really shouldn't be in my room touching things that don't belong to you. Her tone wasn't unkind, but she was certainly peeved. "And my pearls too? They aren't toys, child. They belong to Sir Hugo's grandmother. If the string should break, I would be quite distraught." Olivia bowed her head. She had made a mistake and got carried away with the romance of it all. What she needed in that moment was a pair of forgiving arms to wrap themselves about her, so that she could learn her lesson and move on. But they were not forthcoming, and she had slipped out of the dress and run from the room in tears. Sobbing into her pillows up in the tower, she reflected that the fair childs were very different to her parents, and the formality of their opulent lifestyle was unsettling. It seemed to the lonely young girl that the more money you had, the fewer emotions you were allowed to display. No one had embraced her since her arrival, and it was clearly Lady Fairchild was not going to encourage her imagination as her own mother had done. This contrast to her own family was brought home to her even more when, at the end of the week, the remaining Fairchild offspring returned from their various educational establishments. was about the little orphan that the parents had taken in. Benji, who had become surprisingly chatty over the 2 days they had spent together, immediately became more withdrawn, and Olivia, as an outside observer, wasn't surprised. Within the first few hours, Howard had ambushed his brother with a squirt gun from his hiding place in the boathouse. And Clarence had shouted at him for asking a visiting young lady whether she was hoping to marry the future heir to the manor. The following morning, and Olivia was just as confused. There was no way she could have created such a convincing alternative scenario by herself. Or was there the tiniest possibility that the voice was telling the truth? It was only natural that she would want to believe that her parents hadn't perished in the icy North Atlantic Ocean. But that would mean that Seth was a real person, and what? There was another version of this world somewhere in the universe, much like the world that Alice had stepped into through the looking glass in Lewis Carroll's children's fantasy. Was the wall somehow a bridge between them? For 2 years, she had been convinced he was in her head. But could he genuinely have been the other side of the wall all this time? And then she chided herself for thinking such poppycock. There was, she decided, only one way to put this nonsense to bed. And the following day, she persuaded Benji to spend the night in the tower with her. telling Ruth they were going to stay up all night sharing spooky stories. Which was laughingly close to the truth. At least when I hear voices tonight, it will be a proper conversation between you and Master Benji, rather than you talking to yourself, the woman said as she made up a bed on the floor for the youngest Fairchild boy. You woke me up last night with your shouting. Ruth was a sound sleeper and was rarely disturbed by Olivia's conversations with Seth. So she hastily reassured the servant that the nighttime chatter had just been her play acting. Later that evening, she and Benji climbed the spiral staircase together, carrying mugs of cocoa and a plate of Cook's coconut biscuit. Do you remember when I wondered if the tower was haunted? Back when I first moved here, she asked him. When you thought Howard was pretending to be a ghost and started asking if anyone called Seth had ever died in the tower. She nodded. I still have that same voice talk to me from time to time. Not quite the wide-eyed, gullible boy of 2 years ago, Benji. However, still believed in spirits. She knew this because he always avoided the shrieking bits whenever possible and had jumped at the chance to spend a night reading ghost stories. Bringing his favorite book of spooky tales with him. And you want me to see the spirit too? I have never seen him, she admitted. I hear him through the wall. But yes, I think you are the only person who will take me seriously. Benji smiled, puffed up that he was the one trusted to share this big secret with Olivia. A real life dead person. How thrilling! He clutched his book closer to his chest. But the pair were to be disappointed. No Seth spoke to them through the wall, even though Olivia remained awake until the early hours, determined to share the secret that she had kept to herself for so long. At one point, she had even banged on the bricks with her fist, calling for him to answer her. But there was no response. Benji was bitterly disappointed. The shock news that the country was at war slowly began to sink in as the newspaper cautioned against the stockpiling of food. Young men examined their consciences with regard to doing their duty, and everyone was alert for spies. For the most part, life went on as it had always done. But Norfolk had concerns not felt by those who lived in the west of the country. Would the Germans attack their vulnerable coastline and sweep down to London? Could the war be coming to them? It heightened Lady Fairchild's anxiety, but Sir Hugo insisted that the British Navy would defend our shores and that her panic was unnecessary. However, Clarence's decision to be part of the Great Commission's rush at the start of the conflict soon sent his mother spiraling into another emotional whirlwind. Not many days after war was announced, Lord Horatio Kitchener, the new Secretary of State for War, made a direct appeal for men who were or who had been cadets in the University Training Corps to take temporary commissions in the regular army. The oldest Fairchild's son was one of the first to attest. Olivia hadn't been in the room when he had told his parents, and according to Lois, who was excellent at recounting precise conversations, even though the emotions involved clearly bemused him. Lady Fairchild had become quite hysterical, but Clarence was a man of 23 and there was nothing she could do about it. There was a shortage of officers, he told his mother, and his public school education had given him the qualities needed to fight this war: courage, leadership, and a love for his country. He could not, in all conscience, stand by when he was needed. It will be a long time before I see any action. He had reassured her. I might be ahead of the regular Tom, Dick, and Harry signing up, but I need to undergo more training and secure a commission before I am deployed. To the whole thing finally became heartbreakingly real. When Clarence left a fortnight later for training, and over the following weeks, alarmingly long casualty lists started appearing in the newspapers. Olivia witnessed Benji's silent tears as the horses were taken away, and people began to realize that the war was not going to be the jolly jaunt so many brave young men had convinced themselves it would be. She was later to learn that 3/4 of a million willing men enlisted in the first 8 weeks. But the German war machine had been 40 years in the preparation. And as the Kaiser pushed through Belgium towards Paris, there was a growing unease that the enemy had been underestimated, and the quick victory that everyone had predicted would not materialize. She tried to communicate with Seth, partly to quiz him further over his wild claims that he existed in some place where the Titanic had not sunk, and her parents might still be alive. But more than anything, she needed to speak to someone who was not part of the Fairchild family and had no idea of what they were going through. How refreshing it would be to pretend the country was not at war. But there was no reply to her soft whispers of his name, and no scuffling feet or squeaking bed springs when she pressed her ears to the cold bricks. Their interactions had always been sporadic at best, and often a couple of weeks would pass before she caught up with her crotchety friend. And he was a friend now. Whatever the truth of his existence, and despite their quarrel, he may huff at her unrelenting cheerlessness and grunt at her overly dramatic pronouncements. But he always made her feel safe and that her opinions were valued. As the days passed, however, other things took precedence over conversations with a voice that she started to suspect she had finally outgrown. She still undertook her lessons in the mornings, but helped Lady Fairchild in practical ways with the fundraising for the troops in every spare hour outside of that, so that by December, and with household preparations for Christmas now in full swing, Olivia realized that she hadn't heard from Seth for months. She had grown up so much since moving to the manor. Imaginary friends belonged to childhood, and she no longer felt like a child. Even if he was caught in that bemusing wilderness, where she was also not yet quite an adult. Seth, she finally accepted, had merely been a product of her grieving imagination. He had helped her to settle, and now he had gone. Because hadn't she long since decided that when she no longer needed him, her mind would simply let him go? There was nobody, and so Olivia refused to accept that Howard was dead. Now, this scene is all about after the war. She got through the next few weeks doing the thing she did best, retreating to her imagination. There were a dozen different scenarios that could have played out. The men could have become disoriented and be hiding out somewhere, or perhaps Howard was recovering in a foreign hospital, but had lost his memory, or the party had been captured by the Germans and were in prisoner of war camp. It would, however, take time to establish if this was the case, especially as the enemy was now in a state of utter chaos. But Sir Hugo was calling in all the favors he could think of to discover the truth as quickly as possible. She reconciled herself to the fact that being captured might be the best thing to happen to him. He would be safe until the conflict was over, away from shells and bullets, and out of the rat-infested trenches. She was under no illusion that prisoners had it easy, but every day she played out scenes in her head where her beloved Howard was returned to her. Surely she would have known, felt something, a hole, an empty ache, if he were dead. It hadn't taken her long to feel an eviscerating void after the sinking of the Titanic. and her parents' bodies had never been recovered either. She wondered if her photograph was being caressed and cherished by him in some distant land, a reminder that he was loved beyond measure and must survive the war so that they could be reunited. Or was it buried under several feet of earth, with his broken, lifeless body, waiting to be found and give them all the full stop they longed for? Or perhaps destined never to be found at all. It was nearly a month of not knowing, a month of torture, and then the news came through that they had all been waiting for, with Sir Hugo finding her in the library, listless and exhausted from lack of sleep. She looked up as he strode into the room, waving a sheet of paper at her. "He is safe, Olivia. He is being in a German prisoner of war camp all this time." On the 11th of November 1918, the armistice was signed in France, with all hostilities ceasing at 11 o'clock that morning. Church bells rang across the country. Even Big Ben spoke for the first time in 2 years. The days passed in a blur of celebrations. The war was finally over. Wedding preparations began in earnest, even though they had no idea when Howard would be able to get home. A 3-tier cake had been baked but not yet iced, and Olivia was fitted for a dress. It was mid-December. Benji was back from school, and the household finally had a festive season to look forward to. When the housekeeper sought Olivia out in the library, one look at the woman's face and she knew something was terribly wrong. "The Fairchilds have had a telegram. I thought you should know." An icy terror started somewhere deep inside and slowly spread outwards from her very center, creeping like a deadly poison through her veins and killing every part of her as it went. The war was at an end. The fighting had ceased. Surely it could not be bringing bad news. She rushed to the drawing room and flung open the door. Sir Hugo stood with a piece of paper in his hand, and her ladyship was staring at her husband, pale as the moon, but they both turned to face Olivia as she entered. The look of bewilderment and unfathomable sadness in Sir Hugo's eyes, the exaggerated silence that hung in the air like a heavy, immovable fog, and the way Cynthia held herself, slumped, defeated, and broken, told her all she needed to know. Finally he spoke. "Oh, my darling girl, it's Howard." Olivia's knees went from under her as the world shattered into a million tiny, irreparable shards. First her parents, then Clarence and Lois, and now she had been dealt the most wicked blow of all. Just when she thought all the unbearable suffering and crippling pain was over. Sir Hugo had not yet said the words, but she didn't need to hear them. Howard was dead, and the details didn't matter. He spoke of them regardless. Influenza. They think he was already quite weak from his ordeal, and he caught it when he was being transported across France. Nothing in this world would ever matter again. A whole year had passed, and Olivia Davenport was the talk of the small village in Suffolk, where she lived, and not for the first time. 9 years ago, the gossip had centered around her tragic orphan status and the newsworthy nature of her parents' deaths. But now, the scandal of a young woman, only just 22, returning to her family home, Windy Acres, alone, had been sufficient to fan the flames of local gossip. And then, when the curious young lady began to indulge her whimsical side by building the most outrageous tree house in the gardens and adding a large circular tower to the front of the property and painting the render pink. Of all things, the tittle-tattle really took off. There were even rumors that she had asked a cabinet maker to make her a throne upholstered in red velvet with Princess Cordelia embroidered into the fabric. That was the whisper that made her smile the most, because it was true. She had a lifetime ahead of her where she could do what she liked, and people would just roll their eyes and say, "Oh, that's so like Miss Davenport. Such a queer fish, but a likable one." If just one young girl read about her in the girl's own paper and decided to follow her heart, embrace her imagination, be brave or step outside society's ridiculous boundaries, then she would achieve something worth far more than the healthy royalty checks that were now dropping through her letterbox at regular intervals. Please, Daddy, for me. Olivia appealed to her father with wide eyes. Jasper Davenport nodded. If he comes, I will know, she thought. And then we shall have all the time in the world to get to know each other. Olivia curled her legs under her bottom and studied her reflection in the window pane. Two Olivia Davenports, she mused. One sitting, heart-sore but determined, in the window seat, and another staring back at her, somehow more confident and at peace. She smiled, and her reflection smiled back. So this is all we have from the book. I hope you guys enjoyed the story, and if you did, you can press the like button. And if you have any book for suggestion, you can comment on the comment section so I can give a review on that book too. And you can also buy a book from Best Book for You on Amazon. So I'll be back with another video. Till then, just take care and goodbye.